It's been so long, so incredibly long, I honestly barely know what it feels like to actually fight another player. It's just barriers, shields, bubbles, you name it. Every time I think I get some damage and another one appears and I start to despair. 9 months of double barrier has taken a toll on my mental and I start to wonder, is this what Overwatch was always meant to be? Mindlessly firing into shields? No, it can't be, and I'm ready to prove it. Ladies and gentlemen, today's story is an exciting one. Our protagonist in this episode was just as fed up of Orisa and Sigma as me. In an act of defiance, they decide to say screw the meta and instead leap towards freedom on the back of Dive. So make sure your seatbelt is fastened because we're about to rapidly approach content altitudes as our story today takes place on Numbani. And what better map to take to the skies than one featuring more high rises than I can count. Fittingly enough, all that available high ground makes us the perfect destination to run a dive composition, even if your opponents decide to run double cringe. The only problem is that it didn't seem like anybody on Peanut's team had any intention of following their example. But dive or not, we had a blessed match on our hands, with neither team giving up their honor for the sake of skill rating just yet. And it would be that lack of protection allowing the blue Hanzo to pick up an elimination right out of the gate. That's a challenge of honor if I've ever seen one. The red team's Hanzo was not about to be outclassed so easily, challenging its mirror matchup to a 1v1, just for both of them to end up flat on their faces. Finally, it was Peanut's turn in the spotlight, though they would first have to emerge from the shadows. Together with the rest of their team, this Winston was holding the line, waiting for the right moment to take flight. And that moment presented itself when the opposing main tank became the victim of their own impatience. While Peanut's approach appeared to be a bit more level-headed, the enemy McCree made it very difficult for them to get much of anything done. After a few quick zaps, they had no choice but to try and disengage, though at that point it was too little too late. The blue team had suffered heavy losses, and without their main tank to lead the charge, Jay on Zarya was the only one left who could escort their supports to safety. If the defenders lose any more players, then surely the first point will be lost. And the red team knew that. As soon as their own main tank returned from their spawn, they aggressively pushed on forward to chase down the survivors. With the high ground firmly under their control, there was little that could stop them from claiming the objective. But let's not forget that this is what dive characters were made for. Their mobility could allow the defenders to contest the high ground and come back after all. Though this would take a calculated approach to succeed, one which unfortunately our hero decided to forego in favor of donating their entire health pool to the enemy team's ultimate bank. Let's also not forget that the strength of dive is also its weakness. You can come back very quickly, but it also means that you can feed ultimate charge at record speeds. Though speed was not exclusive to the dive variety of characters, the red team could have sat their butts on the objective and enjoyed their victory, but instead they decided to double down on their advantage, and that with an incredible amount of ferocity. The defenders were still in the process of trying to regroup when the red team rolled up to turn them into minced meat. Peanut was trying to come in and stop the slaughter, but found themselves fighting against overwhelming odds. It was barely a fight at the end, and our heroes were in big trouble. In an odd twist, it was the red team's brawling composition that decided to take the high ground, while the defenders decided to roll up on the streets in standard fashion. Granted, it's not like they were running a cohesive dive at present, but losing the high ground spelled certain doom for them as they continued to run into the grinder, while their enemies casually escorted the payload. There are things that a main tank can and cannot do. Their supports running in ahead just to get flattened was definitely outside Peanut's control, but they also knew that they couldn't let the red team continue to have their way. Along with their Hanzo's Dragon Strike, our hero leapt on forward to finally put a roadblock in front of the attackers. The Primal Rage was meant to buy them time, but Nerfy and the Red Reinhardt did not hesitate to stop them from monkeying around. What Peanut had not noticed, however, was that the enemy McCree slithered his way into their backline at the exact time that they leapt into action. It was clear that our heroes would not be granted a clean teamfight as more of them continued to get staggered, though there was a spark of hope that emerged in the form of a sleep dart. You see, moments earlier, Commentated has made a crucial swap to Bastion, and where that pick might be the antithesis of dive, it also has the potential to completely take the opposition off guard. The sleep dart McCree made for an easy target before our team set up to rain bullets down on their enemies until they had solidly established a DPS differential. The red team had no choice but to respect the pick and invest a sound barrier just to allow Nerfian to safely charge into them in light of their lack of damage. The enemies were still solidly in control, sure, but there was one thing that was proven: the attackers can bleed, and if they can bleed, that means they are mortal. Great as that revelation was, it's not like being mortal ever stopped a demigod from acting out their will, and as such, the blue team would continue to fall under the red team's superior ultimate economy. The only player with the mobility and wits to escape that graviton surge was Peanut, and believe it or not, but the attackers' unwillingness to chase down our hero would soon cause a lot more trouble than they could imagine. The rest of the blue squad could finally respawn together, and thanks to our team forcing out the sound barrier in the last fight, there was no reason for Jay to hold back when they found the perfect moment to drop a Graviton Surge. Peanut's electric cleave damage would burst the red team's bubbles, much like the hopes of a clean sweep as they continue to take an overwhelming amount of damage. But of course, it would take more than that to bring a deity to their knees, prompting Peanut to forget their anger management lessons one more time in favor of delivering a red-handed beatdown. And it is now that I would like to highlight the fact that Peanut is not only not a Winston OTP, despite the choice of name, but they are also playing on console. I couldn't juggle anyone with that kind of precision, even on mouse and keyboard, so needless to say that I'm very impressed with what I'm seeing here. More impressive is the fact that they finally managed to stop the red team's advance. The enemy's cohesion was not to be underestimated, and something told me that winning a fight once every 4 minutes was not going to be enough to win this game. Though it did seem like our heroes finally found their footing, the red team continued to ferociously assault the objective, but without the momentum of past victories backing them up, Peanut and friends had a much better handle on the teamfight. Our Winston had finally gotten a taste of what it means to be free, and they weren't about to let that go. Overwatch players are meant to reach for the sky, and sometimes that trajectory takes it towards the enemy spawn. Towing the line between feeding and carrying, Peanut succeeded in dodging just enough damage to get their primal rage back online. The rest of their team attempting to keep their main tank alive unfortunately cost them their lives as they fell to Bionic's Graviton Surge, but that didn't stop Peanut from Goomba stomping their way into an even team fight. But all good things eventually have to come to an end. Without a support to heal them and no primal rage to bolster their hit points, Nerfian could make short work of our favorite scientist. Things fell apart from there. Our colleagues made a sub to Tracer and already got most of their pulse bomb off of Peanut. When they dove into the backline of the defenders, their intention was not to trade eliminations but to devastate our heroes. But this is exactly where high mobility characters can shine. The last fight on Numbani famously features a strong defender bias, allowing the blue team to come back and bleed more time off the clock. Peanut's unwillingness to swap off their dive pick was finally rubbing off on the rest of their squad, even if the map design had to push them towards making that choice. But at last, they succeeded in stripping 2 whole minutes off their time bank by the time the dust settled. What started off as a hopeless endeavor at the beginning of the game had become a very winnable match thanks to the power of speed, so let's find out if our heroes can take this momentum and make use of it in the next round. If there's one thing this match has shown me so far, it's that the game is so much more fun without double shield. The red team was taking a decisive lead based on smart pushes, good positioning and solid ult economy, rather than relying on meta cheese. Peanut and friends managing to avoid a time bank catastrophe by abusing their spawn advantage may have been a bit cheesy, but ultimately the right call. You'd think that doing so well on high mobility characters would get the rest of their team to follow their Winston's lead, but, well, cohesion wasn't their strong suit. The red team, meanwhile, was all on the same page about how they wanted this defense to go. A hail of grenades made for a quick elimination, and that alone should have been reason enough to avoid the staircase at all costs. Peanut, on the other hand, had the right idea. Contesting the high ground was absolutely necessary, and all it took to get the Kree off their heads was a leap size of our Winston. Where that was supposed to build an advantage, the rest of the blue team decided not to reach for the skies and instead get clumped up in a tiny room, much to their detriment. Now I know that this is a diamond ranked match, but let me just say that this is the #1 mistake I see people make when trying to attack on Numbani. The defenders absolutely had isolated targets on high ground that would have been susceptible to a cohesive dive, but well, coordinating with your team is hard, especially if you're on console or EU servers on PC. Stuffing yourself into that tiny room to contest high ground is rarely a good idea, especially not if the enemy team is running a Junkrat. Our heroes were lucky that the red team hadn't stooped low enough yet to run double barrier, because if they did, these fights would have been even more devastating. Our squad was wasting so much time doing this over and over again. Peanut was going for the high ground but couldn't do so fast enough before the rest of the team got squashed in the staircase. Meanwhile, the red team was having a laugh about how it took them half as much effort to defend the high ground choke point while occasionally slapping a solo diving Winston in the face. And even when Peanut was getting a bit annoying with their primal rage, that wasn't anything that a Deadeye couldn't fix. Now I don't know what's more crazy, doing the same thing over and over again expecting different results, or the fact that they eventually did get different results. After 28,000 lost engagements, their Hanzo finally got their Dragon Strike, and as it turns out, that ultimate can do a lot of damage when your enemies don't have anywhere to go. Of course, the red team had some ultimates of their own to fight back, but Peanut was already on their way to make sure that the strike of dragons would not go to waste, giving their team a fighting chance at avoiding the embarrassment of being full health. The attackers may have had to pay for this chance in blood, but it was one which made all the difference. Our team had secured the high ground and would make sure anyone foolish enough to step onto the objective would feel their wrath. You thought the red team was fast? Well, our heroes are even faster. As long as it took them to get to this point, they had the tenacity necessity to remove their brakes on the payload, and with that came the willingness to push on forward, even to the gates of Tartarus itself. Many eliminations followed that display of alpha chadness, but unfortunately Peanut would fall victim to the enemy McCree yet again, who must be keeping their dead eye specifically to punish our hero. Thankfully, our team was ready to finish what Peanut started, with Jay providing the necessary protection. The blue team had built themselves an actual tank to move on forward and crush the defenders. Speed, violence, and momentum were all on their side, and while their investment of ultimates doesn't appear to be quite as sophisticated as the red team's, it was definitely getting the job done, and before you know it, our heroes were on the right trajectory to beat the defenders' time bank. Peanut had paved the way forward for the rest of their team to steamroll towards victory, but of course, nobody likes being the sacrificial lamb. So when they were the only one who realized that the enemy Ana is still alive behind them, naturally they wanted to be the one to take the glory for that stagger kill. Unfortunately, that Ana was not only prepared for the dive, but they also weren't alone. In true just wait until my cousin hears about this fashion, Bionic would roll up with a nano boost to become judge as well as executioner. When that same Roadhog dropped down from the high ground to turn our bastion to scrap metal, Jay's protective instincts kicked in to find an angle and stop the pig before it actually learned to fly. And right after that elimination, his Reinhardt counterpart returned from spawn, ready to decide once and for all whose hammer reigns supreme. Though much to Nerfian's surprise, it didn't seem like Jay was very keen on taking this fight in the first place. He did little to retaliate and eventually just kind of disappeared rather than establishing dominance. And that's because said dominance was meant to come as a surprise from the flank, just that the defending Baptiste saw the play coming a mile away, and well, if his support with a damage output of an overtuned DPS starts laying into you, there is little you can do but disengage. That whole spark of creativity, let's call it, wasn't exactly helpful when it came to their push. Sure, the Bastion pick was working wonders, but there's definitely some amount of diminishing returns to flanking as a tank, and as such, the payload was finally stopped. Peanut realized that their pick was not the best in the current situation, but rather than giving into Aaron's double barrier temptations, they decided to give another dive tank a shot. Rolling out of spawn as D.Va, Peanut immediately started to lay into the opposition with micro rockets while also devouring molten core charges like their freaking popsicles. They could not allow this to turn into another war of attrition, because if you're starting to have poke battles with a defending team on Numbani last point, chances are you'll run out of patience before you run out of time. Much like before, the blue team's strategy was to play around their Bastion with only a single barrier on the enemy team and no defense matrix of their own. There was no way for them to stand out to our team's insane damage output. This was a completely different look compared to their first point attack, allowing the blue team to move on to the final stretch within a single team fight. The final fight of this round looked a lot like the final fight of the previous one, in that it evolved into complete chaos. As is the case for many such team fights, everyone slammed down on their Q buttons the moment the ultimates came online to see who comes out on top at the end of that special effects rainbow. At the end, the red team was unable to replicate our hero's stalling success, and while Peanut and friends did get a better time bank, it wasn't better by much. And you know as well as me that when victory comes down to the wire, a lot of players are more than willing to forsake their honor to defend their skill rating. I cannot overstate how satisfied I am with this replay submission. The first console game to be featured on my channel, both teams giving it their best and nobody succumbing to double barrier. This was definitely a sight to behold, is what I would say if Jay didn't decide to run Orisa. Now granted, one horse lady does not make this a double barrier composition, but when I think back to the awesome primal rage plays that led up to this point, I can't help but be disappointed to see a character as boring as that. To make matters worse, our team was feeling particularly devious today and made the decision to swap from Bastion to Mei. Boy howdy, I guess being thirsty for SR can take all kinds of shapes and forms, but let me just say that I'm happy not to be on the red team right now. Nerfian unfortunately didn't have a choice in the matter, and as such charged on forward to make use of what little time they had in their bank. Naturally, what was destined to happen did end up happening, and in their attempt to attack swiftly, the red team failed to analyze the enemy composition. It's never fun being on the receiving end of a cryoblaster, but another side effect of the red team deciding to push the staircase was that Peanut had a very easy time to charge up their ultimate, and they were not shy to pop that ult as soon as they got it in order to juggle the attackers onto the stagger train. Needless to say that such a blunder would not go unpunished in situations where time is of the essence. Of course, this isn't to discredit the blue team. They made the right decisions at the right time, though I can't help but feel like the red squad might have been a little bit tilted over the fact that they lost to a team unironically running Bastion. And I take no pleasure in telling you, dear viewers, that all these things combined caused the red team to finally snap. That's right, right, they decided to lock double shields. Is that broken composition going to invalidate our hero's effort and cause a dreaded draw after all, or can the blue team prevail and take home the victory against all odds? Yeah, no, Peanut and friends easily took home the victory. And it wasn't even difficult. A quick speed boost rotation through the low ground to set up on point was really all it took to win that fight, proving yet again that a meta comp does nothing for you if you don't know when and how to play it. I really hope this episode can serve as a reminder that shy of the highest rank in the game, you can still take all sorts of compositions to victory if only you try hard enough. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode all about trying to make your hero of choice work against all odds, I'm sure you also get a kick out of the last one, in which we're taking a look at Overwatch through the lens of a Doomfist one-trick. You can find the card on screen right now, but until then, thank everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace!